I'm going to go ahead and get started then so that we're true to our time and respecting other people's time. Hi, my name is Bob Latino. I'm going to be starting off, I have the honor of starting off the June 2020 webinar week for the HPRCT. This is new to us. We are very much looking forward to this as a means of keeping in touch with the membership and our friends throughout the year. In this instance, we'll be doing it virtually. I just want to make a couple of announcements on the front end. This is a 60-minute session. There's a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen in the toolbar for when you do have questions. The moderator will address the questions at the end of the session. Any unanswered questions will be addressed personally by email post-webinar. And this session will be recorded for posting on HPRCT's YouTube channel. If you hear any backgrounds, I didn't simulate this failure, but I have no air conditioning today, so I am encased by fans. So I'm trying to keep everything cool, including myself. Let's go ahead and get started. This is the first of 3 of these presentations this week, and I have the honor of being the lead off because I'm relatively new when you look at the membership of HPRCT. And I wanted to be able to give my impressions of what I thought HPRCT was when I first came here versus where, what I learned while I was there. So I'm going to do kind of my intro as I go through here because I don't normally talk about my background, but my background is going to be relevant here because of the perspective that I came into HPRCT with. Okay, I'm going to talk about background. I talk a very conversational style. I'm going to talk about, I didn't even know what the heck HPRCT was, plus, much less all these acronyms. I'm going to talk about my observations, my view of reliability versus safety, the pitfalls of RCA. That's kind of my thing is RCA, and then in the end, I'm going to say how I fell in love with HPRCT when I was really in fear of it. Now, I've been in the reliability business a long time, especially as a failure investigator. And you see my little penguin friends down there. Is that this is what you feel like when you're in the proactive business and there's people beating down on you for production pressure. This is the type of treatment that you get. This whole presentation is going to revolve around our friend Maxine giving this statement. I believe that everything happens for a reason. Usually the reason is that somebody screwed up. And this is the crux of the chasm that I saw as the difference between reliability and the safety community. And I put a statement up here. I know I'm paraphrasing, but contrary to popular belief, typically the human being is not the cause of a bad outcome, but they are the victim of a deficient organizational system. And that's what we're going to be discussing here. My background is relevant because it really shaped my perspective of what safety is, what reliability is, and why mine might be different than others in my industry. I've been in the business I'm in for over 35 years. My company's name is Reliability Center Incorporated. And in the early 80s, I started out in a chemical plant in the reliability department doing preventive and predictive maintenance. I actually have a specialty in infrared imaging. I did it on the electrical, mechanical, building envelope, and I had a specialty on flat roofing systems. It's a lot of fun doing those at night. I did the Texas nuclear alloy analyzers. If those who have done this in their early careers, vibration monitoring, eddy current testing, UT, and all the rest of the predictive techniques. And to prove that, I went into our basement and I'm showing some of the equipment that we still have from the late 70s and the early 80s. Chime in if anybody recognizes these FFT analyzers. In the early 80s, this was actually handheld data collectors. These were the data mites that we had guys going out and doing their rounds using a handheld data collectors in the early 80s. This was my old AGIMA, AGA infrared thermal imaging system. You know, now they have it, it fits in your hand. Some people have it on their watch. But this is where we had to carry around the liquid nitrogen fueled infrared imaging, and they had to tape record it. This was the old Texas nuclear alloy analyzers. This is one that probably most won't recognize, but Bob Nelms will, because he comes into my story here shortly. This is a polariscope, and this was to measure stress concentrations. And the department actually paid $75,000 for this piece of equipment to analyze a coke oven failure, and it was a $100 million loss. And Bob Nelms was the one who used this piece of equipment to determine that a single brick gave way and caused this wall to collapse. Now I'm going to ask for your help. Does anybody know what this is? And you can chat in, and if Dean will let me know what some of these people will say. It's the same device, I just use different angles. But I do remember this, which will date me for sure. Do we have any guesses?
No guesses so far, Bob. But,
okay.
I'll
go ahead. This is an original screenshot. This over here matched against your computer screen, and here's the Polaroid that took the picture of it. We've come a long way. Kids are probably laughing at us now. Okay, moving along is that I joined our family business in 1985 as a trainer, consultant, with a special interest and expertise in RCA. I'm a practitioner, I'm a trainer, I'm a lead investigator. I've got a few books on the topic. I have software that manages investigations. So, you know, true and down, I'm an RCA and I'm a reliability guy. So how did I get to HPRCT? Well, I've known Bob Nelms for 35 years. And in 1972, my father was the founder and director of a research and development group for a company called Allied Chemical Corporation, and like I said, in the early 70s. So his R&D focused on the areas of equipment, process, and human reliability. And Bob Nelms was one of the original engineers in that pioneering group. If you can imagine, nearly 50 years ago, these types of principles being applied in manufacturing. They were even implementing James Reason's human error research into their reliability approach on the human reliability side in the 70s. And just think how far ahead of their times that they were. And you know, today people are still striving to do what they were doing. So kudos to Bob and my father's group. To prove this, sorry about this, Bob. To prove it was the 70s, you can look at here and make your fashion statements, but one of these fellows is Bob Nelms.
Good grief.
Good grief.
Dean, I was going to ask you, would you be able to pick him out of here? For anybody who knows one of the more renowned metallurgists, this is Neville Sachs, another renowned metallurgist. This is Bill Stalott, who still works in the local chemical plant, and he's been there over 65 years. He's approaching 90. This is our friend, Mr. Nelms, in the early days, so we could say we knew him when. Okay, so that's kind of giving you a background of saying, you know, I come from a world where I actually grew up in reliability, and it focused on equipment, process, and human reliability. So it was a very holistic approach. So when I saw this acronym, and it was actually this logo that had all these acronyms in it, and I said, well, what the heck is HPRCT? Well, Bob asked me to make a presentation because I've been doing RCA in healthcare for about 20 years. And my original presentation was on
Bob, hold on.
Bob, hold on.
Was it just me?
Was it just me, or
did we all lose
Bob's audio?
What about now?
Hear you.
Hear you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I got some message that popped up that told me to unmute. Okay, getting back in stride. I originally came to just talk about the healthcare industry, and I thought it was going to be a one and done for me. But then I got to listen to all the other presenters, and I realized that I had stepped out of my bubble and realized how many other folks were out there in this safety and reliability space that were more progressive. But my second presentation, I wanted you to pay attention to the flow here, but was on what's wrong with RCA. So I went there to speak about healthcare. The next year I came back and I said, well, I need to give a presentation on what's wrong with RCA. My third year I came back and said, well, I need a partner here because I'm not one of the regulars here and I need some credibility. So I got my good friend Ron Butcher, who was with corporate safety at AES, and we did one on turning Facebook safety into a culture of safety. And the following year, I did the same thing with the resilience side, and I got my friend Beth Lay to do a presentation with me on the joint application of RCA, HPI, and resilience engineering principles. All right, so let's take a look at this. I said I did what I came to about the practical application in healthcare, and then I kept hearing speakers use this term HPI, and I didn't know what it meant. I actually had to go up and ask one of the speakers what the acronym stood for. And because in healthcare, there was a very popular group called the Healthcare Performance Improvement, but I knew that wasn't what it was. So that's how naive I came into this industry and to this really unique conference about learning about human performance improvement. As I listened to the other presenters that first year, and there were some notable experts around, I started to see that their views of the safety crowd around RCA was not endearing. That RCA was grouped as a commodity and even referred to as old school and obsolete. So I'm starting to think of, I'm starting to question myself, saying, I made a career out of this and say, would I do old school and obsolete? So I wanted to learn more about what people felt RCA was. I couldn't understand why they took that position at a conference that had RCA in their name. If RCA is old school and obsolete, it's in the name of HPRCT. So that's really where my curiosity got up. And that's why in the next year I presented, what's wrong with RCA? I'm trying to figure out, what do people think RCA is, and where's the gap? Why am I not figuring this out? I did not disagree with the HPI, HOP, and HRR philosophies. I just didn't see them as new, given my background in reliability. And I've come to realize that it's unique in the sense that, because Bob understood because he came from a similar background, and that they had been practicing human reliability principles for decades. It's just that many people didn't see RCA as including that element of the human reliability. So, I was playing a game of trying to understand why people were defining RCA as they were. I knew it had to be in the definition. And that's why I came back with my friend Ron Butcher about, Facebook. I was really aligning reliability and safety together, is that they were interdependent on each other. And then lastly, Beth Lay and myself had whether we're fortunate or unfortunate circumstances to be involved on a project that involved a failure, and we were able to apply both the resilience and HRO and HPI principles along with RCA, and the world didn't end. We worked together. It was a good thing. So I'm going to be able to do a quick little poll right now, and I'll ask Dean if he could put the poll up. And I want to ask you, it says, when you think of RCA, the first tool that comes to mind for you is what? Is it the 5 whys, the fishbone diagram, or some type of cause and effect expression? Or is it something else? So what's the first thing that comes to mind for you when you think of RCA and whatever your background is? Let's take about 10 seconds to go ahead and click on one of these. So Dean, what's it looking like in terms of our results? That's very interesting. So we got the 5 whys and cause and effect type trees basically in half, and fishbones were lagging. Thank you. I'm gonna match that what you just. Hold on a second. I'm gonna make a note of that. Okay. This is I did this on LinkedIn as well, and it's fishbone fared better here, but certainly cause and effect and the 5 whys were more predominant, and they couldn't be farther apart from each other in practice. So that's an extremely interesting diversity in opinion. And I'm going to go into understanding and explaining the differences between those perceptions. Thanks for your time on that poll. That's extremely interesting to me. Okay, my view of reliability versus safety. I got this term from the Texas City investigation, the Baker report, and his preface, he concludes with, basically, people were forgetting to be afraid. And I said, well, what really does that mean? And I made this chart up for my understanding of that, is that most of us are familiar with the term from the Space Shuttle Challenger about normalization of deviance. When we're time pressured to do anything, we take a shortcut. That shortcut, if left unchecked and then nothing bad happens, there's no negative consequence, then it turns into our practice. And that's a reiterative process. We keep doing that. We go down, and we're really eroding our safety standard. So eventually, this is our potential, and you can see the erosion away from a standard of acceptance and performance. And then eventually, we're going to end up into this unsafe zone because we have a natural tendency to migrate to the boundaries of safety. I always like to use our taxes. You know, we stay in between the lines, but most of us, we're going to ride the line to make sure that the government doesn't get all of our cash. So when you're looking at this at some point, and it's not obvious as to where it becomes safe versus unsafe. And Decker's book refers to this as, you know, this is the drift, the gradual decline into the unsafe zone. And for a lot of what I do in the failure side, the failure analysis and root cause analysis, is that we lack the oversight that watches this erosion occur. Because when something bad, when somebody takes a shortcut and it works, you're getting a pat on the back. When your shortcut doesn't work is when we get disciplined and we probably get a boot where we don't want it. So take this concept and roll with it for the rest of these slides. Okay, we've heard of James Reason's Swiss cheese model, and I'm going to correlate that. I'm going to stand the cheese up vertically as if it's going into a sandwich, and I'm going to correlate it to a logic tree. A logic tree is basically a timeline reconstruction of something that has occurred in the past or an unacceptable high risk. So in here, each slice of cheese represents a defense mechanism of some type, and the holes represent the vulnerabilities. Well, this is the same thing when we're doing reconstruction and we're asking how could something happen. We're coming up with the possibilities, and the things that prove to be true are going to be these vulnerabilities. And we're going to continue drilling down until we come to these things called the physics of the failure, the decision making of the failure, and then the systems that influence decision making. We're going to call those physical, human, and latent. So what's our, how do we deal with this knowing that we have vulnerabilities? And we'll never have American cheese because we're always going to have holes in the cheese. So the best that we can do is minimize the number of holes in the cheese through our risk assessments and our identification of potential hazards. We have to then minimize the diameter of the holes that are left. And then thirdly, what we have to do is go ahead and make sure that where the vulnerabilities we know that are left, that they're not lining up on any given day to cause these bad things to happen. And this is really good because if this was static, it makes it a lot easier, but this gives us the impression that failure is also linear and that there's this one pathway and everything has to be just right. The reality is, and this is not by anybody famous, this is just my interpretation of Reason's Swiss cheese model, is that there isn't just one pathway. There's errors that are occurring all around us. And a lot of them are just constantly blocked by our defense mechanisms. But oftentimes when things line up on any given day, they're going to converge at some point and then cause these undesirable outcomes. Now to boot over here, our reality is that it's not just a regular piece of Swiss cheese, is that cheese is always moving. It's going to the left, it's going to the right, the holes are pulsating, they're getting bigger, they're getting smaller, they're moving to the tops and the bottoms. So that just adds to the complexity of trying to figure out these systems and their vulnerabilities. Okay, I'm going to look at this now from the standpoint of reconstruction, and I'm going to work backwards as to where does the germination of a failure come from. Now this is going to represent our foundation. This is going to be our cultural norms and system failures. Is that we have our systems, which are basically like our laws of our organization, policies and procedures, our human performance criteria, human factors, communication, technology, and training. And this is a key one here because it's management and oversight. It's really the enforcement of these other rules. You know, a lot of these become obsolete, but if we're not picking it up, like I showed in we're forgetting to be afraid, then that's part of the problem too. When these are not appropriate or adequate, that feeds misinformation into the people that have to make decisions. As a result, they're going to make a decision on this information and their experience and their successes in the past, and they're going to trigger a series of observable physical consequences where these cause and effect chains can be broken. The key here is that picture this is somebody's head, this is the decision maker. Everything above it is going to be observable, but while you're in the head and doing reasoning, you can't see that. And the influence on those decisions is down here on the bottom, the system's contribution. So when we have these cause and effect relationships that lead to an undesirable outcome, that's when our triggers kick in. Everybody has triggers for investigating something, and then by that time it's really too late because you're reacting. I agree with the skeptics of that. But if I break the chain here and say I have a near miss, then usually in the businesses I deal with, then it becomes a choice whether we do an RCA or not. And an RCA takes a lot of time and resources to do it right. So if everybody is really busy, if I have a choice of doing an RCA or not, I'm likely not going to do it. The reason I emphasize that is that we should be proactively doing RCAs on near misses and chronic failures because the root system that allowed it to get this far is still there. And I'm going to refer to these as physical, which is observable. The human roots is just the act of making a decision. And then the latent roots are going to be the reasoning and the contribution to that decision. I don't really care. I tell people, I don't care what you label these things as long as we do something about it. I do want to put a graphic in your head now, though, of an hourglass. because I want you to be able to see that the human is the crux of the decision is the crux of everything. Everything above it is dealing with the physics of failure, and everything beneath it is dealing with the systems and the human side. So now this is going to be a key point that I want to, if you get anything out of this, is going to be that this is where the convergence of the physical sciences deal with the social sciences. So beneath is going to be social science, above is going to be the physics of failure. All right, so what do I define a RCA as? It's the establishing of logically complete, evidence-based, tightly coupled chains of factors from the least acceptable consequences to the deepest significant underlying causes. Well, that's a mouthful, and a lot of people don't understand what it is, but I'm going to break it down into 3 simple expressions. That logic tree, which I just described to you, when I talk about logically complete, that's going to be the difference between asking how can on the physics side versus why all the way through. We don't ask we don't get the questioning about why until we get into the human realm and the decision making. Because when if I was to ask why, it connotes that I want a singular answer in somebody's opinion. When you ask the question, how could something happen, you're looking for all the possibilities, because more often than not, there's going to be 2 or 3 things happening at the same time versus one linear path. Failure is not linear, contrary to popular belief. So asking how could versus why is making this type of reconstruction logically complete. Evidence-based. All this is saying is that every node that we're going through here, every hypothesis, is not going to be verified by hearsay. It doesn't fly in court, and it doesn't fly in real RCA. Is that evidence-based means that we have somebody who did some type of test, got some type of data, had an outcome as a result of it, and a due date to get it done by. Tightly coupled means that there's cause and effect relationships here versus using cause categories. The fishbone and the little poll that we did is based on cause categories. And essentially, we're brainstorming within a cause category as opposed to reconstruction. So that's the difference in versus cause and effect RCA and categorical RCA. Okay, so this root system is the same no matter the incident. It's going to be, you know, when we watch these CSI type of shows, you know, the labs they're in the how-to business. They're in the how can and the physics of failure. Their job is not to look at the intent. So that when you get past the decision maker and you start asking, well, why would somebody think that that was the right thing to do that day? And it's usually a very logical reason why people do what they do, and other people would do the same thing. So that's where we start to get into the whys and the organizational systems and the socio-technical stuff. Okay. I want to go through this. I'm not going to do the role-playing part. I want to, because it's a little difficult in this type of scenario, but follow with me. And I want to say that what would be the event if we had a critical pump failure? And most people would tell me at this stage that the event is that the pump failed. I want to give you food for thought and say that I don't think that we do root cause analysis on incidents. I think we do root cause analysis on consequences. And think about that, because then, especially in healthcare, when I do these types of things in healthcare, if somebody falls in a hospital, when are they going to do an RCA? They're going to do it. If you have a fall without harm, you're likely not going to do an RCA. If you have a fall with harm, you're going to do an RCA, and there's likely going to be a claim associated with that. So there's a liability. But our managements will understand the event in the context of its consequences. That will get their buy-in into understanding this, because when it gets up to their desk, it's the consequences that matter. So in my case here, I'm going to go ahead and I want to say it's an unexpected production shutdown. That's why the managements would care. And this particular pump has failed. The motor has failed, the pump has failed, and the seal has failed on this particular production line. This is like the crime scene tape, this little box around the top two levels. Everything in here is a fact, we just don't know why. We're asking the question, how could a critical pump bearing fail? I'm not going to get into the physics of this type of thing. I wanted to be very basic here. Between the purpose of the pump is that you have a motor, you have a driver, and you have something being driven. You have a motor doing the driving, and then you have a pump pushing the flow. So then I have a shaft in here that has to be aligned, and it's aligned with these things called roller bearings. So my question with this is going to be, how can this component here, how can a bearing fail? And if I was to ask everybody this question, those especially in the mechanical field, they're going to give me, they could give me 100 different things. They could give me about lubrication, installation problems, vendor problems. But when we're doing reconstruction, we're doing this visually backwards. And we're going to say, how could the critical pump bearing have failed? There's only 4 ways in which any component can fail. It will be erosion, corrosion, fatigue, and/or overload. So when we, at this stage, these zeros and these 5s, those are confidence factors. A 0 means with the evidence that we have that it's not true, and a 5 means with the evidence we have that it is true. Either a person with a really trained eye, 80% of the time you could read these these failure mechanisms with the eye, the naked eye. About 20% time you need a lab. Okay. I'm going to go through, I'm going to give you 101, metallurgy 101. Of those 4 failure mechanisms, erosion is 2 pieces of metal rubbing against each other, and you're going to have some type of metal loss, uniform metal loss. Corrosion is really evidenced by the pitting. It's an electrical phenomenon, but there's a very big difference between erosion and corrosion. Fatigue is going to be a cyclic failure. Just think about if you have a paper clip and you just keep twisting it, and it's going to overheat and then it's going to snap. Fatiguing is the same cyclic pattern. And then when you have overload, it's an instantaneous fracture. The failure pattern is going to just snap. So now, making it even easier, there's the 2 mechanisms at play is how material failures occur. We either have material loss or the material is overpowered. Fatigue and overload is overpowered, and loss is erosion and corrosion. All right, so we get our report back here. We find out that it was fatigue. We say, well, how can that happen? It's either thermal fatigue or mechanical fatigue. I get another expert to look at this. We find out it's mechanical fatigue. Well, how can I have mechanical fatigue? Well, I can have high vibration. And this is the symbol here. The PR is going to be for physical roots. Well, how can I have high vibration? Well, I can have misalignment, I can have imbalance, and I can have resonance. Okay? Well, how can I have, in this case, we find out that it's misalignment. If you ever want to find out if it's somebody misaligning, then watch them do it. If they don't know how to, if they don't do it right when you're watching, we can safely conclude that they don't know how to do it. And that's not always their fault, as we're going to learn. So at this point, this is a decision that about alignment. It was misaligned at installation, or it was properly aligned in the beginning and then became misaligned in operation. In this case, we find that the person who's aligning is not properly qualified to do the job. Now I'm going to, because I'm at the HR stage, the human root, it's a decision, I'm going to switch to why. I feed my family with the check that I get from here. I say, I don't go to work to do a bad job, so why would I not align properly? Well, the tools that I have could be inadequate, or I simply just don't know how to do it. So we look back here and we say the lack of annual equipment inspection and review. The tools I'm using are outdated, and we don't have an annual program to determine that. They're aligned improperly because I have less than adequate training. Somebody retired and you gave me his job. So therefore, it was just by osmosis, I'm supposed to learn this. And less than adequate management oversight. How come somebody was in a position in a job that was not qualified? I see this in healthcare all the time. So where is our oversight mechanisms to be able to find that out? Remember in my Forgetting to Be Afraid chart? This is our ability to observe the erosion of our standards and our performance. And then we always have the production pressures at play, where we're going to say that we were time pressured. I took a shortcut because I don't have time to do it right. Happens everywhere. So when I get to this part here about being aligned improperly, this is really where I see the HOP and the HPI and the HRO is that this is where all of that type of science comes in, and those well-versed can do this much better than I. But this is at that in my hourglass, where the H was in the middle, the decision maker. This is all the social science stuff. Blaming, I think we're all in agreement that blaming is not going to solve anything, and that's not the intent here, is that we're looking for the reasoning for the decision. Okay, now this is a human performance reference guide that we particularly use, and this is my limited understanding. This is just one of the template things that I'm talking about, but when you're getting to that decision maker up here, you know, we look into things of illness and fatigue and boredom. When you get into overconfidence, they underestimated the complexity. They do it all the time. It becomes rote. We take shortcuts. We've done it all. We've always done it that way before. You all know the routine. And I wanted to say this too. I put a quote down here. The first thing that came to mind for me about the concept of HOP was in the late 80s, and Bob actually worked with him at my father's place. Dr. Ivor Davies was one of the 16 consultants for Jack Welch at GE at the time, who was implementing the Six Sigma and his own human engagement. Is that he had a program called Workout, and it had very similar principles as the HOP. So that article references how Jack Welch transformed GE with employee engagement, and it's where they were forced to engage with each other. Well, I wouldn't say forced, but they had those type of sessions to where people were able to vent with their bosses and then decisions be made very quickly. Okay, at what point do we stop drilling down? Because I can go back to Adam and Eve on this if I want, but you know, at what point do I quit doing this? I wanted to put this example because it's more in my bailiwick when I'm dealing with mechanical, electrical, or any of that kind of stuff. But there's no reason on this that I can't do the same thing with recreating and reconstruction with the human performance type of issues, where they're more human related than something breaks. Because there's you know, if you look at any clock, there's still minutes and seconds that are ticking. So cause and effect is at play, but it does get much sketchier when you get into the human mind. In the example I just gave you, if I had stopped at the physical root and replaced the bearing, would the problem go away? No. The same systemic influences would force that the next bearing would fail as well. If I would have just stopped and blamed or disciplined the mechanic for misaligning the shaft, would the problem go away? No, because the system is already there. That's going to, whoever you put in that place, and you've done the same thing with their education and not their tools, same thing's going to happen. So we address the latent contributions, and that should stop the chain. If we fix the systems, that should affect the chain and not allow that sequence to happen again. Okay, so on this, what I'd like to do for this second poll, Dean, if you'd be so kind, is say, when I think of RCA, I envision analysts typically stopping at the stuff that breaks, the physical stuff, the decision maker, the human roots, or the latent roots, or another category of other. There's always got to be another. So let's take just a few seconds, and this was your impression of RCA before this type of session, and what you feel they practice at your facility. The reality. These can't be tracked to you, so don't worry about that in terms of privacy. All right, Dean, what did our friends tell us? Oh, this is, well, from my standpoint, this is very encouraging because the latent roots is up at 44. It's not always the winner. So over time, this is really a good thing. And obviously, if we stop at the human roots, that's going to be the antithesis of what HPRCT is about. It's actually a conference that is not about not blaming. And the physical roots, I'm glad to see that that we're not typically stopping there and thinking that it's going to go away. So thank you for participating in that with me. Okay. So when we talk about the pitfalls of an RCA system, and this is going to play into my view of reliability and the role into HPI, is that most RCA systems fail because they lack analytical breadth and depth. They're not doing the how, can, and the why. They think that failure is linear. They think that there's one root cause. So because of that, that's why those types of things under the commodity acronym of RCA fail. Unfortunately, most that call whatever they do as RCA, they're not collecting, they're not taking the time to collect evidence. Hearsay is not fact. Try it in court if you think that I'm lying. Is that what's the most time-consuming part of an RCA is going to be the collection of evidence to back up that what we say is true or not true. Most, and I hate to say this as well, but it's, I got 35 years in, strive only to meet the minimum requirements. So really RCA is a checklist thing, is that, their performance and success is not based on any bottom line metrics. It's the fact that we turned something in and somebody accepted it. I don't really blame analysts for being poor analysts as much as I do for those who accept it as meeting their requirements. So success, I'm going to go back to when you're doing checklist RCA. Unfortunately, checking all the boxes does not mean that anybody is safe. Being compliance RCA does not equate to safety. And I think that many in this business understand and realize that. We just have to get our leaderships to. Lack of adequate management support. They may all be on the block and sit there and talk about the soapbox about they do RCAs and they want them to be primo, but if you're not giving people the resources and the time to do it, they're going to be taking shortcuts, and those shortcuts are going to be in collecting the evidence and proving what they say. They're going to give you what you want, not what you need. And this is going to be one of the biggest ones. I probably should have put this up at the top. The lack of understanding of social sciences. The understanding the impact of systems on human reasoning. And I can tell you that from my standpoint, I am not near as well versed as everybody at HPRCT in the social sciences. That's why I love coming to this conference, is because I learn so much more about that, and it makes me a better investigator. Working on what's urgent and not on what's important. We focus our RCA efforts on the chronic failures, the things that happen all the time but don't hit a trigger in an organization. Because they're under the radar and they're seen as the cost of doing business. They are eating our lunch way more than these sporadic failures, these one-offs. Okay, so in the end, when I'm coming in here and I'm saying, I wanted to be able to say that we have unity in purpose and we're diversified in perspective. And then that seems to be a mantra. This came as it's paraphrased out of Jack Welch and GE. But I think it reflects my understanding and my perspective of how HPRCT is unique, because it brings a reliability and safety community together. And I think that while many believe that we operate in silos, and that many would believe that there's a competition between the two, I see them as interdependent on each other. I think they are critical to each other's success, and that you can't be successful without the other. Okay, I want to go back to my hourglass here, because we all know that time is money. And I'm going to say that when think about the tree and the example that I went through earlier, is that when we were dealing with the physics of failure, we're dealing with when we're going through we're dealing with the deductive logic and the physics of failure, because the physical sciences are, to a degree, they're determinable. But when we get to that human decision, we switch to inductive thinking. We're going from specific to general, and we're dealing with the social sciences. Now, I put these two on here as well, and I find this to be true, is that when we tend to judge other people on, post-event type of things, is that we look at them and we judge them based on their decision outcome. However, when we're looking at how people judge us and they look at us in a similar circumstance, we would prefer to be judged based on our decision intent. And that's really the two differences here, is that if you're doing a proper RCA and you're incorporating these social sciences into it, we're seeking to understand decision intent. And that what really gets down into the differences of what I call shallow cause analysis versus root cause analysis. Unfortunately, I think the prevailing opinion of what RCA is as a commodity fits in this shallow cause analysis category, because many just relate it as to the exact same thing as 5 whys, where I ask why 5 times in a row and I get a single answer. That would be great if the world operated like that, but when I showed you my interpretation of the Swiss cheese model, things are very complex. Failure is not linear. You're never gonna, I've been doing it again, decades, I've never been involved in analysis that had one root cause in it. And think about in your own circumstances, as to say that the difference between asking how, could, and why at the times that we do. All right, so what's the difference between root cause is that it's going to be the breadth and the depth of the analysis. It's going to be the strength of your evidence. It's going to be how you measure the effectiveness, that what you did made something better, because RCAs are very susceptible to being measured by performance in terms of the effectiveness on the bottom lines. And then incorporating, and we're doing this ourselves now, into taking everything that we learn in terms of all of this logic and formatting them into algorithms that we can use for the AI and the IoT, machine learning, and all of these types of new fancy things. They're ripe for use in understanding why people do what they do. So in conclusion with this, I wanted to be able to bring a message of unity and saying, while I came here and I perceived that this was a non-reliability thing and it was a one and done for me, when I came here and I saw that I did see evidence of silos, but when I looked at it from my perspective and my background, I said, I don't understand why the silos exist, because I don't see it the way that other people see it. We both look for proaction versus reaction. We want to prevent and mitigate versus become better responders and better reactors. We both want to look at things at risks versus consequences. I want to effectively assess risk before versus becoming a better responder. I want to prevent the need to respond. And then lastly, opportunities versus problems. I want to identify and pursue opportunities versus be burdened with tackling the failures of the moment. I mean, reliability as a field is about proaction and the ultimate no surprises. If we're good at reliability, we will not have surprises. And I think that in my own little mind that I think that this is the intent and purpose of the HOP community as well as the HPI community, resilience. I think we all have the same goals. So my parting poll, a few seconds, based on the last hour you've been nice enough to spend with me, is would you say that RCA, as defined in the way that I've expressed it, and HO principles are synergistic? This is easier, not yes or no? Because we all can get along. I did it with all my presenters, my co-presenters, my friends. All right, Dean, what does it look like? Absolutely. There we go. That's the kind of message that we were looking for. Thank you for your participation in that poll. These poll things are really cool. And thanks, Dean, for doing those for me. Okay, so in parting now, I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton. Session number 2 is 11 o'clock on Eastern Time on Wednesday. You will have the one and the only Joe Esty. His title will be Essentially Human, Why to Err is Natural, and Can Anything Be Done About It? You know, he's a very impactful speaker. He always has been. He was one of the standouts that I remember from coming to these HPRCT, so I look forward to listening to that myself. And I do want to note that our plans are to offer these webinars monthly, so be on the lookout, and please offer ideas for topics that you'd like to see. You know, we're going to try to have a proper mix of theory and practice and ensure that, you know, it's not just a bunch of people watching death by PowerPoint, but that we're actually going to be able to apply what we learn. And I think that brings me to a close. Bob, I don't know what time I was supposed to end, but I have 8 minutes left. I think that's all right. And we were,
hey, Bob, it's Dean.
Yes, Dean.
We actually
got a question,
and I'm echoing
a little bit. Sorry about that.
Okay.
How do you know if you have facts when you are dealing with soft hearsay evidence about why someone did what they did?
Well, in a lot of cases, and I understand where the question's coming from, but in a lot of cases, people's actions can be validated by whether they're reports, whether it's by direct observation for other people, whether it's you know, any type of systems that are in place. Oftentimes can validate whether somebody did or didn't do something. You know, I had a case in a steel mill once where it was a major failure in a hot mill, and the mechanics had told me that they had done the inspection the day before and that the coupling bolts were tight. Yet when we went and got the coupling bolts, the about a 1/4 inch under the head had been oxidized, which made it quite clear that they had not been tightened. So I won't say that it's always like that where you have the physical evidence, but in a lot of the cases there will be some physical evidence to support that somebody did or didn't do something. And this isn't an accusatory thing. And you know, I learned a lot from the HPI folks on for my interviewing skills on how to be able to determine that, because they have to be put at ease and not that they're being interrogated. That's a great question. Any others?
Amit, please.
Amit, please.
Amit has risen his hand, and I thought wanted to ask a question. He has been.
I raised my hand by mistake.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Oh. I know it couldn't have been that clear. I'm never that communicative.
Bob, what does
HOP stand for?
Let's see. Obviously, I've been coming to the conference so much now that I fell into my own trap. When I went there, I didn't know what HPI was, and now I'm using terms and assuming everybody knows. Human and organizational performance. I'm very sorry that I did not clarify that in the beginning. That is a common term at this conference now, and it's a community that engages the workforce.
Bob, when you say that RCA is a commodity, what do you mean by that?
I believe that when anybody uses the term RCA, that no matter what they're doing, they all assume it's the same thing. That when people go out and say you're going to buy RCA, that you're not selective about what it is. It'd be the cheapest thing out there, and that you're not differentiating between the characteristics of methodology as opposed to maybe initial cost. So it's just everybody just groups it into the same thing, and they see it as one thing.
Great answer.
Great answer.
Well, does anybody want to see Bob Nelms' picture from 1972 again?
Come on.
Come on.
You were a fashion setter, man. And I'm drinking iced tea.
We still have 52
attendees
that are signed on.
Are you sure
there's no questions?
I just want them to know I'm drinking Arnold Palmer iced tea, and it's not a Coors Light, okay? I think everybody's just anxious to see Joe on Wednesday now.
There is another question.
Okay.
I'll read it.
All right.
How do you
educate
or reinforce management on the importance
of how
when they want
the why?
That is a great question too, and that's a good lead into the collaboration between the HOP and HPI communities, human performance improvement, and the reliability and RCA guys. Man, you know what I've found over the years is that the front lines is not very good at all about, and they you know, they're not trained to be, about how to make a business case for their RCAs. And I think that they need to be able to speak in terms of the leadership. And that's exactly why when I said the difference between the incident and we don't do RCAs on incidents, we do RCAs on the consequences. The bosses will understand and get the consequences. If it's gotten to their attention, they've got some type of liability concern. It's either excessive cost, that they've lost a lot of production, it's that they've had a regulatory violation, it's that somebody has gotten hurt or even killed. So when RCAs get to that level and hit by a high trigger, you will get their attention. Now on the chronic stuff, there's absolutely no reason why RCAs can't be totally proactive and to get our boss's attention. Is that, you know, the chronic failures that occur all the time that get put into being a cost of doing business. If you look at a failure not on its individual occurrence, the chronic ones, and you look at how often that they happen in a year times their impact per occurrence, you will find millions and millions of dollars of wasted cash that is built into the budget as a routine cost, and it's never questioned. You will get the CFO's attention if you go ahead and aggregate those costs of chronic failures over the year. No doubt. And also, there's no reason you can't do RCA on the results of your risk assessments, like FMEA. Do a Pareto cut on your FMEAs and determine the 20% of the failure mode risks. And you'll find out that 20% of them represent 80% of the risk. No reason you can't do an RCA on unacceptable high risk.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
A question?
A question?
Will a recording
be available?
The answer is
The
yes.
answer is yes.
We'll let you know,
where it is
as soon as we
get it there.
Another question,
Bob.
Sure.
When the tendency
for managers
is to hold individuals accountable for severe
outcome,
does discipline
or recognition improve future performance?
Well, I don't want to get into personal opinion, and the social scientists are better at this than me. But I know that if you discipline people like that, what you're going to do in the future is just suppress reporting. You're not going to get cooperation from anybody anymore. And that these people make these decisions. If you look at it as an opportunity, as the boss, where you normally would have disciplined somebody like that and everybody knew it, and then you go out and you publicly look at the reasons of why they made the decision, and that you look in the mirror as that you contributed to that failure with your systems, then you're going to make some progress. But if we don't, I wrote a paper on this recently about, sometimes we have to look in the mirror and face that we're part of the problem. And I think, Bob's session on Friday will reflect a lot of that on the introspection, and that's, Bob speaks often about that. But if bosses think that disciplining somebody will lay the foundation for improvement, they're sadly mistaken.
Joe Esty will be addressing this in his talk as well.
Yes.
Another interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had to modify your investigations during the recent pandemic?
And how we conduct them or help?
I think that's
what they mean.
Well, yes. And, we're often in a support position. Our primary work is that we train lead investigators and we train executives and things like that. But we also are hired as third-party independent investigators, so that, when somebody has legal liability on the line and they need somebody to come in who doesn't have a bias, we don't have any skin in the game. But we are doing some of our work now online, and we are facilitating a team that's on the site and directing them to go and get which type of data. So we work with a team that's on the site, and we're a remote facilitator.
Bob, all of these questions are thought-provoking.
Yes, they are.
You said you would answer any unanswered questions personally.
Sure.
But there is another one here that you might be able to answer quickly. How do you prevent RCA from becoming a commodity in an organization? How do you keep the RCA standard high when leadership requests an RCA but won't commit the appropriate resources?
Well, I think they answer their own question on that one, because to me, if you're, the way you do that is that when people give you crap for RCAs, is that you reject them. You don't accept them. I mean, we do have a quality control report that we go through with something like that. We teach managements how to evaluate an RCA, because they don't typically know. And if it doesn't have these basic elements, like the evidence to prove each thing, then you reject it. And they're not going to come back with that same mistake if you start rejecting the RCAs and you know how to quiz them on that. they're going to be better prepared the next time. And I made the statement earlier. I said, you know, I don't blame the people that are doing bad analyses. I blame the people that are accepting them. And no matter what fancy tools you have or systems that you have, the analysis will only be as good as the analyst. So if you're not giving everybody the tools that they need to do the job right, then you're going to get what you got.
Now, some of you logged on anonymously, and therefore Bob cannot answer your question personally. So if you have further questions,
my email's on there that they can just go ahead and write that down.
There you go.
There you go.
Last call.
I might have to get me a beverage then.
How do we give him
a hand virtually?
Well, sometimes on LinkedIn they have that little, like the high five thing is like a slap. Sometimes it means a slap in the face, and I don't really know how to take it.
Well, thank you, Bob.
Well, thank you, Bob.
No,
we'll work on our feedback issue before we have the next webinar with Joe.
Please
be here on Wednesday at 11 o'clock.
And thank you so
much.
much.
Thank you so much, Bob.
Thanks everybody for your time. It's lunchtime. Have a great lunch.